Thank you very much to all of the organizations and entities that are partnering in this wonderful initiative. We have already had a really inspiring opening, and with that commitment from Professor Beckles to establish an institute. But we are really thrilled to have our colonels and senior officials from most of the Maroon communities, and they're here on the panel with us today. We know they got up very early this morning, the crack of dawn, when the cock was crowing. So come and join us in Kingston, and we are really grateful and we appreciate the commitment that you have shown by doing that. And we are grateful to the UWI, always a willing partner, and the Center for Reparation Research, the UWItv. We didn't acknowledge UWItv earlier. That is streaming for us so that all of our activists and well-wishers and supporters of the Maroons are able to join in and listen to the important contributions that are coming out of this forum. We're also so very grateful to IDO Network International and the Global African Diaspora Kingdom. Welcome, Your Highness, and welcome, Queen Grace. They have shown real interest and commitment in the Maroon communities, and they've brought so many traditional kingdoms with them that all recognize the important contribution of the Maroons and in their continuity of African traditions, beliefs, expressions, the way that they have kept them alive in the region. And so that is why IDO is here and is here for about the third time. So we welcome, please give them a hand. So our panel is where we will hear from the authentic voices of our Maroon communities and other experts. Our chiefs are here with us. We have apologies from Acting Colonel Delano Douglas, and we had also expected to have Deputy Rohan McGee from Flagstaff.
Passing on his regards and his apologies as well.
Okay. Oh no, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So our objective here of this panel is to look at three aspects. We want to start with the core of the issue. And Chief Corey had emphasized this from the outset when we were discussing this symposium, that we need to start with the Maroon treaties. Treaties signed with the British, by the Leeward Maroons, by Captain Cudjoe, and by the Windward Maroons, by Quao and Nani. And so that's going to be our starting point. And we're going to look at what the treaties say and edify ourselves and get a deeper understanding of what are the implications to today of those treaties. Then this panel will also look at addressing myths and misconceptions about the Maroons in the history of Jamaica, and also telling the unique stories of truth, of resistance and triumph of the communities in Accompong, Flagstaff, Scotts Hall, Moortown. And well, Mama G is here from Charlestown, so I know she will fill in. And the treaties established the Maroons of Jamaica as free, independent, self-governing group in resistance to slavery, who valiantly defeated colonial forces, and also ensured them 1,500 acres of land in the cockpit country. And so all of this is at the heart of the discussion. And we know we have a lot of questions about who the Maroons are. Are they indigenous people? And what is their contribution to Jamaica's development? Okay, so we're going to start, and I'm going to welcome to the microphone Chief Richard Corey, Paramount Chief of Akompong, His Highness Papa Odwe II, to share with you his words of wisdom and telling his truth. Bayete.
Ashe. 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 I'm very grateful for this opportunity. It's something that I believe the indigenous communities of Jamaica has always been saying, that our stories are being told by everyone else but us. And the forum was needed to have a sitting where we could all put together the narratives, dispel these rumors, dispel all the negative innuendos that has really been designed to set us back, right? Hold us up in the valued conversations and negotiations that should have taken place decades ago. So one of the first things that I have always maintained and tried to impart to the wider Jamaica and the world is that it wasn't just parts of Jamaica that was at war. It wasn't in Akompong, it wasn't in Scottsall, the entire island was at war. So who were these people that were warring the colonizers? These were the First Nation people of the island. They called us Maroons. The term Maroon is rather derogatory. It said we were wild and untamed, right? But the essence of who this treaty speaks to were those persons identified as Maroons, which is the only reason we hold on to that term today, to be honest. Because when you say you are a Maroon, it almost disconnects the other party that you're talking to immediately from hearing anything you have to say, because of the feelings, the emotions that they carry when the word Maroon comes up. And a lot of that owes to lies that have been told on us deliberately to disenfranchise us from the spirit of victory that we shared amongst ourselves to defeat the colonizer, bring them to their knees, where we etched out freedom for ourselves, created and established that nation that they had to recognize as an authority on this island. So the Maroons weren't just a small set, it was the representation of the peoples of the island at that time. Over the years that the wars ensued, then while the Maroons raided plantations, they freed many enslaved who helped to build out these communities that grew exponentially over those 80-odd years. The other part of the history that is missing is the contribution from our brothers in Haiti, because we were a part of an indigenous militia. A lot of you didn't know that. So when they thought they killed us off and we kept coming and coming, it's not just now that we're using boats to go into other territories and boats from other territories coming into ours. It is no strange reason why Dottie Bookman was so heavily influential in the Haitian Revolution. It is of what we need to understand is that the people that were living here were actually sensible people. They make us seem like we were dumb. We were highly skilled warriors. We were navigators, right? We knew what was going on and we knew ahead of the colonizers. That's why we prepared. We took to the hills. The natives who were here, yes, we were amongst those who were first here. The Tainos, the Arawaks, that's what they described us as, right? But our history is so much deeper and richer than the colonial period that has been plastered around to set as our foundation of learning. The Maroons have always known themselves as free people. We were here first. Spanish came here and saw us. The British came here and saw us, right? So understanding now that when we say those First Nation peoples brought the mightiest military power of the Western Hemisphere to its knees, one must understand how were they able to accomplish such feat. One, we know of the guerrilla warfare tactics, right? The camouflage that you see today being worn by military was as a result of the Maroons and what they did to hide themselves in the forest. So yes, we invented camouflage, right? The point is this. When we etched out that freedom was for the Negroes on this island. That's the term that the treaty uses. Not one place in that treaty does it say Maroon. So, the freedom that exists in the island today exists for the termed Negroes on the island. What distinguished those Negroes from other Negroes that were within the plantation? It was the mentality of liberation. The Maroons would never settle being enslaved or being in a plantation. The mindset was liberation, was freedom. So when that treaty was drafted between Codjo and the assignees of the British, it says by letters patent. And if we know what a land patent is, we simultaneously comprehend the significance of a letters patent given to two esquires, Francis Sadler and John Guthrie, which means their hand is now the hand of King George. It's a plenipotentiary. So the agreement between the Maroons was between the Maroons and the hand of King George, signed on his behalf by Guthrie and Sadler. That agreement is the establishment of two jurisdictions on this beautiful archipelago we call Jamaica. Those two jurisdictions would be respectfully controlled and operated in peace by the Maroons and the British. So the Maroons got their independence, as they term it. We call it a recognition of our existence and our freedom and our rights to this land. That's what that treaty was. It wasn't a colonizer giving us land. It was a colonizer saying, hey, we want peace, we're suffering enough losses, it's now time to fix and try to move forward. The challenge is that what the Maroons did to the British at that time, we have to comprehend how the British was earning its wealth. Sugar was like oil. The Caribbean was like Dubai. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
So there's no question why Jamaica had running water before even New York, or had electricity in certain places before the rest of the Western Hemisphere, because this was the epicenter of European development and wealth. So when the Maroons figured out that over 50% of their wealth is coming from here, that's when we start burn up the cane field. And what happened? They started to suffer in the pocket. And this was the high seas. So now everyone was at war. Spain was out there, France was out there, Portugal was out there. The British could not fall. They had to present to their creditors who was funding their exploits an agreement to say, we have things under control. That's what made them yield. It was the trade and the commerce. The minute we impacted that and impacted the money, that's where they took the hit. The casualties, yes, but essentially it came back to the money. Immediately, once that treaty was signed, it established the understanding that Codjo would be over here with his men, adherents, and the British would be over here with their adherents. 100 years after that, there was the abolition of slavery. What happened during the abolition of slavery? Many slaves were let out, essentially given lands controlled by the plantation. These lands were then titled. They were able to farm, go to the market, and then they remit a particular amount, which is what we now know as tax. That would go back to the crown. They then offered the Maroons participation in that commerce. So they offered to title our lands as well. And the Maroons resisted. Because again, that was the same trick. The trick that was being played to recapture our legacy and our estate and put back under the crown books. You will see in several occasions where the government, or I should not say government at that time, the colonizers at that time would have made efforts to pass acts of parliament to override and subjugate the treaty. And we have seen in the past where the crown would have stepped in and said, you can't do this. Yes? And they would have replaced governors for acting outside of the terms of the peace and friendship that existed on the island. They blamed the Paul Bogle rebellion on a compound. And look how far a compound is from where Paul Bogle is. It was always an effort to take back that treaty by whichever means possible. Because to date, that is the most powerful document that the British has ever signed with any other indigenous entity. They would never do another treaty bearing the same terms of freedom that was given to the Maroons of Jamaica. That's what makes this island so special. Because it was only 38 years after that that the United States got their independence. Only that in the United States, the Maroons and the planters sided to take on King George. Why? Because the planters would have seen what happened in Jamaica. They would have been well aware of what happened in Jamaica and would now be concerned that their lives were at risk. So what did they do? They sided with the natives. And they got a treaty with King George, which is why today the natives in America have a government-to-government relationship. Because literally, the natives there gave the planters their constitution. They call them the Moors. That's why the Moorish movement is such a powerful movement. The Moors recognized the United States of America as a sovereign nation. The Moors gave the U.S. its recognition. Those are our same brothers, the Seminoles. And the history tells us who those are and the relationship to us. So we know they knew what happened here and were afraid it would happen to them. Fast forward to Haiti. We knew the games that were now being played 60 odd years after the signing of the treaty with the Maroons here. We would not make that mistake in Haiti, which is why the French was totally kicked out. Do you understand what's happening now? So the first independent republic is actually here on this island. We just allowed the British to continue. And the document that allowed them to continue was the treaty, which is why it's so chastised. But here we are today. The people who stand to represent those people who at that time saw it fit to come to terms with the colonizer. And what do we do with what we have? We have a legacy that precedes this government that sits here. We have recognition in the international law. We're covered by distinct treaties that are signed and partied by our government. But what has happened in Jamaica, sadly, is that when independence came up, which essentially is the crown stepping away from its side of the agreement of commerce on the island and putting in place a responsible party to oversee its affairs. That's what the state government is. So you need to understand that that government does not represent our rights. So we want to just be sure that who we are today is truly represented, that those people are the free people of the island and should be consulted, or anything has to be done with the land or with the Constitution which impedes upon their rights.
Thank you so much, Chief Curry. for that really insightful. And it's difficult, it really is difficult to stop our speakers because they are sharing and giving us such insight. We're very grateful for what you have shared with us so far and for bringing in the Haiti question. I think that was very important. Thank you so much. I want to introduce and bring on stage now Ambassador Anuel, also recognized in the chieftaincy. And I have to say that within the African royal tradition, the chieftaincy and royalty really speaks to vision, leadership, sacrifice, and selflessness. And I want to just give them one little story that when Queen Mzilikazi from South Africa was here in 2023, and she came to Akompong, and that was the same time that Chief Corey was installed. As she came into Ambassador Chief Anuel's presence, she said immediately, he is of royal blood. She got that vibe. So, with that introduction, Ambassador Anuel.
Thank you, thank you. To all our dignitaries here today, to all the panelists, and to our friends, Maroon's family, greetings, ancestral greetings. I will try not to be too long, so I'm going to be very direct, and I'm going to go to trying to dispel a myth and telling our truths, because since even recently, since our January 6th event, and just us expressing all of the video content on social media, we start to see the same old narrative come back again due to a lack of education from our people. You start to see them say Maroons are sellouts, Maroons are traitors, Maroons returned the runaway slaves, and they keep going back to this narrative that the colonists would have used to divide our people. Obviously, because if they were using our people as chattel property, as free labor, they would obviously need to separate those free Negroes from those who they wanted to deem as their own chattel property that they may have had under indentured servant contracts. And I'll explain that a little further, because we have to be very right and exact in the history of what is happening, and in looking at the history, understand where the Maroons played their part in terms of freedom fighting and allowing Jamaica to be such a special place, hundreds of years later, where we are living, breathing, having our being, and having this conversation today. So where I'm going to start in breaking it down, I'm going to go to the second clause of the treaty, because it is important for people to know, both locally and globally, that there are two clauses specifically expressed in the treaty providing freedom to what you would say as the runaways, or those who would have been under indentured servitude and made it to what is now considered Maroon territory. Those clauses in the treaty are Clause 2 and Clause 6. And I'm going to go to Clause 2 first and then explain the clause that everybody has a problem with in regards to the Maroons returning, quote-unquote, runaways. So the second clause of the treaty says, secondly, that the said, and I'm reading from the harvard.edu archive, where our treaty is embedded on the Harvard University website, because there was a big research done, and this can be found on Google, and it has footnotes actually explaining that we are a sovereign people, and the various boundary lines of that should be respected. Secondly, that the said Captain Kodjo, the rest of his captain adherents and men, which is a council, shall forever hereafter be in a perfect state of freedom and liberty, excepting those who have been taken or fled to them within the last 2 years past. Very important why they would have expressed this 2-year period, because there was indentured servitude contracts, people who actually voluntarily came to Jamaica. So we have to understand who were slaves and who were not slaves, even though they may have looked like us. Some voluntarily did come to Jamaica, and in order to get their freedoms, they would have had to work for 2 years on a plantation, and they would then be set free. This is very important in the history of the lexicon. Most people don't want to explain this to our people because the narrative is used to continue to divide and rule us, right? So this 2-year period, it says, if such are willing to return to their said masters and owners with full pardon and indemnity from their said masters and owners for what is past, provided always that if they are not willing to return, meaning then they were granted a choice inside the treaty in this clause. So if they were not willing to return, they shall remain in subjection to Captain Kodjo and in friendship with us according to the form and tenure of this treaty. There each quote-unquote runaway or indentured servitude was granted a choice to stay with the Maroons or to go back to the Maroons. Now I'm going to explain this to you. Inside this clause, it does not say who. Remember, we're in the mountains now, correct? This is the location of the signing of the treaty. Who is actually going to take these slaves who decide to go back onto the plantation? Who is responsible for taking them to the plantation? Was it the British or the Maroons? I will show you the clause that will explain that it was decided, because we're looking at the chronology of how we're writing the treaty, that it was obviously decided that the Maroons would now help for those people who did not want to stay with the Maroons, that they will help to bring them back. That was a choice of the slaves. That was just not the Maroons deciding we're going to pick you up and put you back onto the plantation, right? I know I'm pressed for time, so I'm going to try and go fast. All right. So that was the second clause of the treaty. Here's another clause that expressed the same choice again. Sixthly, that the said Captain Kodjo and his successors do use their best endeavors to take, kill, suppress, or destroy, either by themselves or jointly with any other number of men, commanded on that service by His Excellency the Governor or Commander-in-Chief for the time being, all rebels. So it didn't say slave right here, because what happened is, if someone ran away from the plantation, their status may have changed. If they were now rebelling against the British across the island, whether through the windward or the leeward, they were deemed now as rebels. In order for their colonial laws to now take effect, whether they can say shoot on sight, etc. Today we have it as SOEs, Zozo, and different type of statuses that we place on people, where some may say you can shoot on sight to kill because that person is a dangerous person. We have to understand there's nothing new under the sun. We were just in different periods of time. All right? 1 second. Oh, but this phone. Come on. All right. Sixthly, that the said Captain Kodjo and his successors do use their best endeavors to take, kill, suppress, or destroy, either by themselves or jointly by the number of men commanded on that service by His Excellency the Governor or Commander-in-Chief for the time being, all rebels, wheresoever they be throughout this island, unless they submit to the same terms of accommodation granted to Captain Kodjo and his successors. Once again, another clause creates the opportunity for whether it is the indentured servant, whether it's the runaway slave, whatever status they may have had at the time, but once they have reached to Maroon territory, there are clauses in the treaty that allows them to remain in subjection to the Maroons and protected. Now, here's where we get into the conversation now about the other two clauses, and I would like to explain it really quickly. And those clauses are Clause 9 and Clause 10. That if any Negro shall hereafter run away from their masters and owners, and shall fall into Captain Kodjo's hands, they shall immediately be sent back to the chief magistrate and of the next parish where they are taken, and these that bring them are to be satisfied for their trouble, as the legislature shall appoint. Now, it's interesting. Most people don't get the opportunity to read the Harvard breakdown because the footnote right in the Harvard breakdown, it says the assembly granted a premium of 30 shillings to each fugitive slave. So there's a word that they put right before the term slave, fugitive slave. Now today, if somebody is wanted and they run away, that person has a bounty put on them. That person could go into communities, rape someone, murder someone. Again, we don't know of that time what was happening. We know of today, and we can try to analyze what are the things analogous, the similarities today compared to then. What we know today in our system is that if someone run away and does something, hurt someone, injure someone, or let's just be honest, if that person did sign a contract and said, I want to be an indentured servant for my freedom for 2 years, that was their choice. May not sound agreeable now, but that person did have a choice. If that person ran away, the said master or owner could say, my property ran away, he signed that. That still happens today. That still happens to today in 2024. Someone can sign a contract on a job to work. You run off on the contract, you run off on your equity. Someone can ask you or sue you in today for the equity. Because we're not hanging anybody or beating or lynching anyone today. But the same concept applies that these were laws set in stone, and we were now trying to analyze how do we live by these laws that we now created to end a war. Right? Lastly, the number 10 now, because we have to dispel it. 10, that all Negroes taken since the raising of this party by Captain Kodjo's people shall immediately be returned. Now 10 and number 2, clause 2, work with each other. Because remember, if you had a choice not to go, if you had a choice that you didn't want to stay with the Maroons and you wanted to go back to your masters and owners where you would receive full pardon and indemnity from the said masters and owners, because you know they were lynching, beating, cutting off hand, cutting off foot, but Captain Kodjo and the Maroons ensured no harm would come to these people, even if they decided not to stay with us and to go back to the plantation. We ensured the clause protected them. We have to make sure that we understand if they wanted to go back. Clause 10 is simply saying the Maroons would help bring them back to the plantation, which is now agreed by all parties, including the person who has the choice whether to stay or to go back. I thank you.
That was brilliant. Don't you agree that he's royal? He's royal. Thank you so much, Ambassador Noel, for breaking that down. That really gave us tremendous insight into those clauses in the treaty. I will now invite Mr. Bert Samuels. He's a Pan-Africanist. He does law, you know, as a sideline. He's really a Pan-Africanist. And so I want to welcome him to also give, here, okay, wherever you prefer. Welcome.
Greetings. With only 10 minutes, may I say all salutations to royalty in the house. As an attorney in a Jamaican court, I want royalty to know that this morning in every court in Jamaica, before the session starts, a policeman shouts in a Jamaican court before the delivery of justice, God save the King of England. Now I adopt Rastafari and say, fire burn for the King Charles of England, because he had a monopoly, his bloodline had a monopoly to move enslaved people on the Atlantic Ocean between Africa and Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean. And in royalty in England is blood money from the slave trade. So again, I welcome and I respect my brothers and sisters as kings and queens and all others gathered here. For me to take up the task in 10 minutes to describe a 15-clause treaty, I would say is unfair to me. However, I think there's a historical background to all of this, and it starts this way. The resistance of the former enslaved Africans by the English to the British enslavement on the island came about 68 years of struggle. The Spanish did call upon their enslaved Africans to help with the resistance of the new capturers, the English. They wanted the Maroons to help them. I call them the freedom fighters, not Maroons. The British defeated their fellow European enslavers, but could not conquer the African freedom fighters they call Maroons. The relationship between these two European nations and our people was one of inhumane exploitation, opportunistic relations with an oppressive system of conquest for the purpose of enslavement. The island of Jamaica is one huge, big crime scene. The genocide, and I say it is a crime scene because the genocide of the native Taínos by the Spanish with Columbus's lie of discovery is the first evidence of that. Secondly, the Spanish kidnapping of Africans and their enslavement here by the Spanish for 1.25 centuries. Yes, the Spanish had enslaved people here for 150 years rather. Thirdly, the Spanish asking Africans they oppressed to join them to resist the second set of enslavers, the British. They did ask the freedom fighters Maroons to help them to repel British capturing of this island. The British, having driven the Spanish out, waged war on a people who suffered 150 years of Spanish enslavement, but lost that war and were forced to go to the negotiating table. The British now seek to use the Maroons, the freedom fighters, like the Spanish did, to do their dirty work, to keep the enslaved Africans on the plantations, returning those who dared to run away to freedom to be severely punished. And yes, they also use the freedom fighter Maroon, that should another European country come here to take the island, that the Maroons, the freedom fighters, would join with the British to protect the island of Jamaica. So if I were to go to the treaty, they call the clauses in the treaty articles of pacification because they were under pressure from these freedom fighters. As my brother has said, that they are the ones who have invented camouflage so that they blend with the plants. They did that before any other army in the world did that. So that after 100 years of the abolition, it served a century before the abolition came about. So that it's coincidental that in 1738, there was this treaty between the British who were being beaten by our brothers, the African freedom fighters. 100 years after the treaty, then slavery could no longer work. And we have to salute Sam Sharp, who in 1831 waged a war that caused that slavery could not be maintained here. It demonstrates that the enslavers have never abolished slavery out of benevolence or humanitarian grounds. In their books, they write that they were convinced that it was immoral, and they have their Wilberforces and others. It is the Maroons, the freedom fighters, and our brothers and sisters, led by the Christmas riot of 1831, that caused slavery to be unworkable because the thirst for freedom never left our veins. In the preamble to the said agreement, they said peace and friendship among mankind is agreeable. They were looking for peace, and they were now recognizing African freedom fighters as humans for the first time. It is the Maroons, the freedom fighters, who cornered the British into coming to some arrangement that they could not win the wars. They could not manage the hills because in those hills, our brothers and sisters were able to lay wait them and take them out. So the first article is that the use of the British military titles the African warriors and freedom fighters as colonizers' pitch, which they wanted to say that they should join, our brothers and sisters as well, that we should join with the British Army. The second article says it recognizes the freedom of Captain Cudjoe and the men, and immediately thereafter makes an exception of the enslaved, others who had been taken or fled to the Maroons for the past 2 years. So what they tried to do is to use the Maroon African liberation fighters to say that they were separate and distinct from us. There has been this tendency to say that African blood doesn't run through the Maroons and other enslaved persons in Jamaica. We want to move that away. We were all African brothers. That's why I'm on this podium with you. We are all Africans. So that this habit of trying to divide and conquer us has to do with the Maroons, to see if we could have an agreement where the Maroons would be here, the other Africans would be here, and we are setting the Maroons against Africans in terms of their freedom. The third article identifies 1,500 acres of land to the Maroon freedom fighters. I want to say this, that the Maroons had already inhabited these lands. Under British law, if you stay on property for 12 years, you get it by way of adverse possession. So I do not think this 150 acres, 1,500 acres rather, was any gift from the British. You were already there. They can't give you what doesn't belong to them. It really belongs to the Taínos, who were stolen from by the Spanish and then stolen from by the British. So I do not think that we should look at this 1,500 acres as any gift from the British. Under their own laws, you settled on it for more than 12 years. So it belonged to you, and much more than that 1,500 acres. The fourth article says the plant and raise, that they are allowed now to plant and raise animals in the bushes. Now, how can they give you what you were already practicing? You're already raising animals and planting in those hills. So a lot of these clauses are just a facade to make you think that you are being given a gift. The Maroons were not given any gift by the British. They took it themselves. Then it speaks, the fifth clause speaks to the boundaries for hunting of animals and how to catch, and were divided between Kodjo and those and other settlements equally. In other words, they wanted to come and tell you how to deal with your own settlements, how you were to divide plants and animals. I know that there are clauses in here where I know that these rebels signed, but they were not prepared to obey these clauses. I know that the resistance did not stop with these treaties being signed. And I know that there was not any strict adherence to it. It was signed, but you remained a militant war force. The seventh clause, in case the island was threatened, that if another European, clause 7, was that the Maroons, the freedom fighters, should join with the British so that Jamaica would never be lost to any European country. That's a big joke. We were never joined with them to defend a place that there was no freedom. The eighth clause, that if any white man do any injury to Kodjo, they would have to call the governor and give justice. Now, what they made sure of, if there's someone who was trying to, as it were, attack Kodjo and his forces, that Kodjo should not operate with self-defense and kill them. They wanted anyone that sought to attack Kodjo or any of his brothers and sisters, that those persons would not suffer death. They should be handed over to the governor. I know that no freedom fighter, even when that clause is there, would allow a man to attack you, a white man, and then you hold him and hand him over to anyone. Attack for attack, blood for blood. I know that's what would happen. Now, the ninth clause is the trouble clause. This is one of the most controversial clauses. And my brother has referred to it, where there is a clause that says that the enslaved persons who ran away should be returned, and there would be monies given for each person that is handed over. Now, I want to know the history of how many persons were in fact handed over by freedom fighter Maroons. It's a critical clause. It's been used against the freedom fighter Maroons. But where is the evidence that they actually carried out the return of enslaved people? I don't know how much of this clause was in fact acted upon. It also said that clause 10, that all Negroes taken since the rising up of party of Kodjo should be also returned. 11th clause says that Kodjo and his successors shall wait on his excellency if so required every year. There's also another clause that said that there should be a resident 2 white men in the hills. Now, that was, to me, an attempt to cut away from the independence and the sovereignty of the African Maroons. That's a troubling clause. 1 minute is left. And therefore, I think that when I look at this treaty as an attorney, as a Pan-Africanist attorney, I can say it is one thing to sign the treaty. It is another thing to dampen the spirit of freedom fighters. I do not think that this treaty caused the Maroons to lose the sting and the attack that they put upon British colonialism. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Our Pan-Africanist has spoken. Mr. Samuels, thank you so much. I must say he's also a reparationist and a member of the National Council on Reparations for Jamaica. Thank you so much. You have also given us tremendous insight into this treaty, but also brought to life the way in which, because history is about human beings. We read things in a book, but we have to understand the dynamics of living and relating to each other. And we need to understand our own psyche as Africans. And in much the same way, in Africa, we know that our people fought. They didn't put us willingly on a slave ship. And it's a similar story here of the Maroons. Let's move on quickly to Colonel Wallace Sterling. Please welcome him of the Moortown Maroons. I think maybe the longest serving colonel. Welcome, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Let's see what time it is now. I just want to say, Mayaka. Good day to you all. And I do pay respect to everybody that is here. I am always at, paying some sort of pain to point out to people certain things, certain innuendos about, Maroons. And I use the word, but I'll give you an explanation. First of all, let me recognize Miss Beverly Carey. And I'm giving this recognition to her because in this building today, the foremost person that can speak on Maroon history is the most noted Maroon historian, Miss Beverly Carey. She had put her life work in researching the history of our people. And she didn't do it from the outside, she did it from the inside because she herself is a Maroon. And she's from the Windward Maroon, from the Moortown Ginger House region. So Miss Carey, I want to thank you for the work that you have done and to make it known to the world many of the things that people did not know about the Maroons. Many of the things that persons, first of all, a legend can be sometime turned into a myth. And you are able to clarify, to make it clear as to who Nanny was and her legacy and everything like that. We thank you. But let me start with something. I refer to myself as Yenkonkono Pikibo. Maroon, like my fellow chief said, was really a derogatory way to describe the persons who left the plantation. And runaway slave does not come into my vocab. The enslaved Africans that were forcefully brought to this part of the world is how I describe our African forefathers who were taken here, not willingly, much against their will. That's how I describe them. But the word Yenkunkuno, as I refer to myself, it's an Akan word. And if you look into what the meaning of that word is, it means people who are independent, people who are self-reliant, people who live together in communes. I watch your back, you watch my back. We hold things in common. And that was the spirit that kept our foreparents going. That was the spirit that led them to be so triumphant and so in all the battles that they fought. Because if you even lose a battle, it doesn't mean that you lost the war. At the end of the day, it was demonstrated that our foreparents won this war. But would the colonizer accept the fact that a bunch of wild Negroes, untamed, barbarians, savages, managed to defeat the greatest army on the face of the earth at that point in time. Can the Americans admit that they were beaten by the Taliban in Afghanistan? They will never ever do that. Can they admit that the Vietnamese had beaten them fair and square in Vietnam? No, they won't. But then the generation that will come will understand and analyze these things that yes, it is true that these bunch of persons wearing sandals, these guys running up on coconut trees and climbing all over the place with far inferior weapon than you managed to overcome them. Our foreparents were able to do that to the British because, first of all, they understood the terrain. They were in sync with the terrain. And they, even more so, had a passion to want to live a free and independent life away from the plantation system. And that is what kept them going. But I want to look at something that is being done today. Something that is afoot, where the government is seeking to reform the Constitution. We have no problem as Maroon with not having King Charles or Queen Elizabeth or whoever their era successors are as head of the government in Jamaica, the people of Jamaica, because frankly speaking, this is something that should have been done in 1962. But for some reason or the other, we think that the laws of the white man is superior to that of our African foreparents. When I was in a compound town the other day, I made it clear that had the government took a book or a page from the Maroons and established a constitution along that kind of line, Jamaica would be a better and safer place today. So everybody spoke eloquently about the treaty that was signed. And we know that what was negotiated with our foreparents in the bush sitting under the tree is not what was written on paper in the treaty. Because it would have never happened. How long after the negotiation took place in the bush was the treaty written? You got to look at the time that lapsed and when they could have gone back to Parliament or the House of Assembly, as it were, and to renegotiate, did not even honor the things that Godfrey and the rest of them said. Even in the war with the second Maroon War, the so-called Second Maroon War, it was a betrayal. So we are saying now that whatsoever is in the treaty, whatever it is that we need to do, the government have never invite the Maroon community, the indigenous community of Jamaica, to say, we are having this negotiation, we are doing this reform, we need to sit down with you and hear your side of the story. What is it that you want inside there or what you don't want inside there? But if you're going to do something that is not pleasing to us, that's fine with us. But know that at the end of the day, it can be trouble for you. Because we are not going anywhere. We have had this treaty signed, depending on what year you want to count, or what you say, 285 or 286 years ago, but it was done. And from the day after the treaty was signed, the government, they still want to change it. You know, speakers have alluded to that. But the fact is that the tenacity of our foreparents, which come down to us today, is that we stood fast. It was a blood treaty. And we are not saying that all aspects of the treaty is relevant to today's society. But we are saying when changes has to be made, it cannot be done unilaterally by the government. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand what I'm saying, or that I'm talking about PMP or GLP. I'm talking about government of Jamaica, whoever formed the government of Jamaica. Okay, if it's not going to be the PMP, it's going to be the JLP, at least for the foreseeable future. So whatever we do and whatever we did, I know we met with the leader of the opposition the other day, and people are saying that we shouldn't have met with him. But I'm saying to people, anything that we had discussed with the leader of the opposition is the very same things that we will discuss with the government when we sit down with them. Because my being here is not about me. It's about a generation that is yet to come. The situation that we are facing now, I have no desire, we don't have any desire for our children to come and face the same kind of situation. We want to set the record straight. We want to make it clear that going forward, this is how the Maroons and the government is going to be treating with each other. You respect us, we respect you. This is not something that is handing down to us today by this present sets of government from 1962. Because nothing was said in a positive way. We are asking that, first of all, in the preamble to the Constitution, it must recognize the indigenous people of this island. Yes. We can no longer, there are some songs that our foreparents sing, right? And the songs are basically what record the history of the communities, right? There's one Maroon song, it's a chromatic song that said, Braka Master send come call we. We know they're not up to no good, but we are go. And we are going to roll feather bed. Yeah, and I just want to say the last thing. And also, there's another song that they say, we are Maroon warriors. And if you stand in our way, we will trample you and get to where we want to go. We are not going to releague. We are not going to turn back on what it is that we believe in. And we want to have a decent conversation with both government and opposition, and with secularists thing, amicable. Because we don't think about a third Maroon war, because it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I think we are sensible people, and we come to the understanding that we can really sit down and have decent conversation and work this thing out before it gets any further. So, because I couldn't have come here today without raising my concern on these important issues that I have just raised. So once again, Medasi, thank you.
We will now move to Colonel Latibudair of Scotts Hall. Welcome. Great to have you again. He was here in January and he's back. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. All protocols observed set by the speaker. Thank you guys for having us and having me in particular. Now, I am not an historian, so I have more questions than actually answers. So I'm going to need you guys' help in the audience, of course, that know more facts than I do. First of all, I could tell you that just about everyone in Jamaica, including children, knows about the Maroon. When I go to some of the schools, I usually ask questions to see what they want to hear. I would ask, what you know about the Maroons? There's 3 things everybody knows. One of them is Maroon people do Maroon people walk on banana leaf. I said, well, I heard about that, but I didn't hear. Does Nanny catch bullet? I said, she's a human. I don't believe that. The next one is Maroons are traders. These are the 3 things everybody knows. Now, so what I'm saying is that there was more to all of that than what we know. People gravitate to the bad thing. I myself, as a child, I didn't like to go around Maroons because I was afraid of them. What my parents told me about them because they had turned to the church instead. But that's okay. That's another thing. So, someone to talk about the treaty. Now, I don't like this treaty at all, because a treaty to me is something that should be like a contract. You agree to something, and I agree to a part, because there was a war going on, and the bloodshed had to be stopped. So they come with a treaty now. When it comes to a treaty, you do this and I do this. What I see on the treaty is how much we had to do. I don't see in writing what they were supposed to do. Like Colonel Sterling said, it seemed like they tried to left that out deliberately. For the historians, I want to find out the things that they should have been done for all that we have to give. Because we weren't fools, We couldn't read everything, but we know that if I'm going to give you that, you're going to have to give me this. They claim that they give us freedom. Okay, we like that. It was 84 years of war, 84 years of bloodshed. It was time for rest. Like he said, I've seen the greatest army in the world. Went to Afghanistan for 20 years, and they left their shoes. Okay? It was 84 years of bloodshed. So the people who signed the treaty, most of them did not agree, but we signed to stop the bleeding, which was okay. Now we have to honor what we signed. It was all about what we had to do. I don't see nothing about what they had to do. We talk now about the new constitution that's coming up. For the past 62 years, Jamaica, the situation with the Maroons have been placed in their hands to fix it. They haven't even made an attempt, as far as I'm concerned. I heard there was several seeds what was sowed here in the University of the West Indies and never bear any fruit. So they always call for the Maroons to come, show your face, dance for us. And I'm hoping this is another dance. This is not another dance. Because we ourselves, we don't want to dance anymore. We don't want to sing anymore. And again, Colonel Sterling said we don't want to fight anymore because we don't have no drones, we don't have no bombers, we don't have no nuclear weapons. We have ourselves, and we have our God, and we have our children. And this is what we need. But the war must continue because the treaty did not fulfill. We did our part. It's not just slaves we returned. They will ask us to protect the island from invaders. Everybody came and benefited. Every other nation pulled their pocket from Jamaica, except people who bled for it. I don't agree with that. We have to change this. Everybody come to Jamaica, get what you want. I've seen them. Land is gone. They buy the best beach, and they put a Jamaican there with a shotgun. How is that? So our child cannot jump that fence to swim on that beach that we bled for. Sometimes we speak of it. They talk about this constitution again. Get rid of the king. I went to court in Jamaica for ticket, And it's not me against Jamaica. It's not me against you guys. It's me against the queen. Was in Buckingham Palace. And I didn't do nothing, but it's me against her. How come? Now they want to leave again with the bill that was never paid. Who's supposed to pay this bill? We have people from Africa, kings and queens, come here to help us. What about who's here? They are still dividing us. Remember, we were Africans before we were Maroons. So we are still one people with one aim and one destiny. Our politics is taking us in a bad place. The way we vote for our parties, we have to change that. We need to vote for our future and our children. We need to fight more for what we need. Again, I always wonder how did the Maroons manage to beat such an army? Of course, I was a part of one of the world's finest fighting force in the world. So I know war. I studied that. So I tried to find out how did, the couple bongo man them manage to beat such a vicious and unfair army. Anyway, they got help by the Almighty. The terrain. Two things. Our rivers saved them, and what was provided for them when they got there. They didn't know where they were going when they ran away, claimed to take to the hills or whatever. But when they got there, they found the equipment they need, the herb that they used. We talk about the bushes, the camouflage. They said that Maroons used to turn into bushes when we see them. No, they were the bushes. The same thing. Now, the same thing about Nanny catching this bullet. Now, we understand that Nanny is a grandmama. We hear that she was grandma. Granny Nanny, we know her. She wasn't catching no bullet. I thought she was the first inventor of the bulletproof vest. Yes. She's imagining. No. But remember, in World War II and World War I, there was no vest. But when I was a child, there was carloads of white men used to come to my village, the colonel, to take him to find the Maroon's secret. They were looking for something. They knew, too, that she didn't catch that bullet. And moreover, the person who was catching the bullet probably wasn't even Nanny. Nanny was too precious. She was too love of a queen. She was everything to us. So somebody else put on something and dressed like Nanny, and then, take the position, take the bullet for them. So while they were, because remember, everybody want Nanny, So as soon as they see her, everybody aimed to her. So we could sneak up behind them and bust them head with a piece of stick. But they don't want to tell that. They want to tell us, oh, Nanny was catching bullets. That's something else, because we know she wouldn't have lived that long and been a grandma if she was catching bullets. But they also tell us the cow jumped over the moon in school. So they could tell us anything we believe, But yes, it is so wrong now for we to say, okay, we're going to a new constitution without resolving the issues. And I don't think we should let them leave. No, they need to go. But we should let them leave until this matter is resolved. They have all the facts. We talk about a Kongwang. We talk about there was Maroons everywhere. Remember, it was a war, A war, you fight on different fronts. So when they make a treaty with a Kampong, they also make treaty with the rest of the Maroons, which was never mentioned because a Kampong was the popular one and they're saying Kampong was the only one. But no, we had to fight in different fronts. There was also a protected area because they could always kill the Maroons, but they still come to where they're coming from. So there was an area that the elders, the sick, the wounded soldiers were, but was never found in. My, I would say, vision of that, there was a place that was never discovered. Now, Scottsdale was named the secret town. Nobody knew about it. And I heard, too, from, our history was never written, but told, that those are one of the places where the sanctuary was, where the children, the pregnant woman, the wounded soldier, the medicine, the hospitals were there. Because remember, the fighters couldn't do that. They had to stay in the front to protect that central area. And it's by me studying war, understanding that some of the things that they tell us is really not the way it went. Because they don't want to tell us the truth, because we're not supposed to know that. We're supposed to believe what they tell us. So I hope I'm not going over my 15 minutes or my 10 minutes. I got 1 more minute? Okay, I think I have something here. What was it? Again, how do we challenge the new constitution as far as let's rectify this thing now? Because I think either Jamaica is not interested in fixing this problem, I don't know how to. So we are asking for help. How do we approach this situation? Because again, they're moving on without us. And we are saying nothing more about the Maroons without the Maroons, right? And I hope you guys realize that most of us are Maroons, but we're afraid to say so because we're ashamed of how they class us. And we need to stand up again and say, yes, I am proud to be, because the blood of my ancestors is in me. And I could be somewhere else other than being here today, but I want to see this movement going, and I want the children to know who we are. Not because they said, oh, we return slaves, or we are traders. But then if they give us that much, they wouldn't want to be that person either. So even if me and Maroon, me not tell nobody. So we want them to be proud of themselves and know about the good things that we did for this island. And again, thank you guys for being here. And I hope this is not another dance, but we're about to solve some of these issues and some of these problems that faces us so we could plot a new future for the children. So they don't. Thank you much.